This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Today, the US and France call for a ceasefire in Lebanon. Putin considers widening his conditions for using nuclear weapons, and the New York City mayor is indicted on a federal charge. From TLDR News, this is your daily briefing for Thursday, the 26th of September, 2024. Today's main story is that the US and France, along with other international allies, have led calls for a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. It follows a week of heavy Israeli airstrikes on southern Lebanon, which have so far killed at least 600 people and displaced more than 27,000 in just the past 48 hours. It also comes as the Israeli military has told troops to prepare for a potential ground offensive. In a statement released on Wednesday evening at the UN General Assembly in New York, the US and France, backed by the G7, EU, Australia and 3 Arab nations, said it's time to conclude a diplomatic settlement that enables civilians on both sides of the border to return to their homes in safety. US officials indicated that they expected a response from Israel and Lebanon, quote, in the coming hours, although at the time of writing, no formal response has been given. However, a ceasefire right now looks unlikely for at least 2 reasons. Firstly, Israel has vowed to continue fighting in both Gaza and Lebanon, and its forces currently have momentum. This morning, the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the Prime Minister has instructed the IDF to continue the fighting with full force, and that the fighting in Gaza will continue until all the goals of the war are achieved. For context, last week, Netanyahu's cabinet voted to add securing their northern front with Lebanon and, quote, returning the residents of the north safely to their homes to the country's war goals. Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz also wrote in a post on X that the IDF would continue fighting Hezbollah with all our might. Secondly, Hezbollah is also unlikely to agree to a ceasefire. This is because Hezbollah's very existence is to fight Israel, and a pause in fighting would, according to some analysts, call into question its entire being. That said, Hezbollah has suffered heavy losses in terms of leadership and infrastructure over the past week, whilst inflicting relatively little damage in return. We'll be sure to bring you further updates on the escalating situation in the Middle East, so make sure you're subscribed for those. There's more on the way, but remember to subscribe and ring the bell for more daily briefing tomorrow. Plus, if you want to support the channel like David Webb, then consider joining the TLDR membership program for just $1.99. Moving to Russia now, where Vladimir Putin has laid out exactly what he would consider an attack on his country. In remarks made on Wednesday night, the Russian president explained that his government would consider an attack from a non-nuclear state that was backed by a nuclear-armed one to be a joint attack. The Russian president went on to explain that he was considering changing the rules and preconditions for how they would use their nuclear arsenal. These comments are quite clearly designed to relate to the war in Ukraine. Ukraine itself is a non-nuclear state that receives military supports from other nuclear-armed countries, such as the US. The comments are also seemingly designed to coincide with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's trip to Washington this week. He's set to meet with US President Joe Biden today. It's understood that the top of Zelensky's list of requests from the US is permission to use Western long-range weapons against Russian targets inside Russia. For their part, Ukraine has denounced the comments, with Zelensky's chief of staff claiming that Putin no longer has anything other than nuclear blackmail to intimidate the world. Moving to the South China Sea now, where, for the first time, a Japanese warship sailed through the Taiwan Strait. The JS Sazanimi ship, a naval destroyer, passed through the strait yesterday and was accompanied by ships from both Australia and New Zealand. The reason Japan has not previously sailed any ships through the strait is because it has wanted to avoid upsetting China, which claims both Taiwan and the strait itself. While we don't know exactly why Japan has chosen to pass through the strait now, as Japan has not yet commented on the move, we do know that the military vessel was passing through in order to take part in military exercises. On the part of China, the Global Times, a state media organisation, quoted an unnamed source, saying the Chinese military had conducted tracking and monitoring throughout the vessel's entire course and had the situation under control. We'll update you in a future episode if China comments on Japan's recent actions. On Wednesday, New York City Mayor Eric Adams was reportedly indicted by a federal grand jury on at least one federal charge. At the time of writing, the indictment is yet to be revealed, but there's been some speculation that it may have to do with Adams' alleged ties to the Turkish government. On top of that, many of Adams' associates have also recently been indicted over a corruption investigation into his mayoral administration, and some members of his administration are reportedly considering resigning. In a video statement, Adams was defiant, stating that the charges are based on lies and that he intends to fight his case against them. He also gave no indication that he would be resigning as mayor. If Adams did resign, however, New York City public advocate Jumaane Williams would become acting mayor and would need to set a date for a special mayoral election within 3 days of Adams' departure. That election would then be held on the first Tuesday after Adams had been out of office for at least 80 days. At the moment, the ramification of this scandal seems to be confined to New York City, but it could still give local Republicans a boost for the upcoming US House elections, if they can find a way to successfully tie Kamala Harris to Adams' alleged misdeeds. And finally, in some uplifting news, we discuss the amazing story of Iwao Hakamada, an 88-year-old Japanese man who has, today, finally been acquitted of murder after spending more than half a century on death row. Hakamada's legal saga began in 1966. He was working at a miso processing plant when the bodies of his boss, his boss's wife, and their 2 children, who had all been stabbed to death, were retrieved from a fire at their home in Shikoza. Authorities accused Hakamada of murder, arson, and stealing 200,000 yen in cash. And after what he described as a forced confession, Hakamada was convicted and sentenced to death. His acquittal came down to some clothes found in a tank of miso a year after his arrest. Hakamada's lawyers argued that DNA from the clothes, which appeared to be bloodstained and were used to incriminate him, did not match his. They also argued that the police could have fabricated the evidence. In 2014, a judge declared that the clothes were not those of the defendant, and that the possibility of his innocence has become clear to a respectable degree. Defense lawyers then argued that the stains could not have been blood, as blood would not remain red on fabric that had been immersed in miso for a year. Then, this week, a ruling found that investigators had tampered with the clothes that they hid in the tank of miso, and Hakamada was declared innocent. It brings to a close one of Japan's longest and most famous trials, which took a heavy toll on Hakamada's mental health. He can now go on living in freedom with his 91-year-old sister, who has spent her life fighting for his release. What do the world's best politicians have in common? They're willing to learn something new every day. And if you think that sounds too hard or too time-consuming or just too overwhelming for you to do, then you haven't tried Brilliant.org. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. Like I said though, the real value here is that you can do this easily every day, truly committing to lifelong learning. Slowly, over time, you'll not only pick up new skills or get better at maths, but you'll also feel the satisfaction that comes with bettering yourself and staying ahead. For instance, if like many world leaders, you want to get better at handling finances, you might want to check out the ton of new data science content Brilliant has just released, all of which uses real-world data to train you to see trends and make better informed decisions. They're perfect for learners of any level to start or continue learning data analysis, with a full suite of new content covering data visualizations, algorithms, regression models, and more. Plus, you can gain additional insight by working with real datasets from sources like Airbnb, Spotify, Starbucks, and more. To try everything Brilliant has to offer free for a full 30 days, click on the link in the description.